in Binghamton. He's 88 years old, and was just a fun guy to talk to.
And that's a great book, isn't it?
In fact, if I have an extra copy if you want to take that with you.
Well,
if you have any interest in reading on it.
I may later on.
Sure.
We're leaving this Saturday, and we'll be away for 3 months, and so I wouldn't be able to get to it. I'm a very slow reader, which is an unfortunate habit of mine. I don't know why. I guess that's my makeup.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. I've given this back to you. I read it, and I've made copies for my files, the comments of the attorneys. This is a good, terrific thing to have.
Yes. Well, now, I'd like... Now, you said that very possibly you may be organizing some way a museum or a library. I'd prefer that you keep this and it'll be in good hands.
Oh, sure.
I know that you would have it, because it would just be kicking around the office otherwise.
If you don't mind, that would be wonderful. Yeah, where we're at is met with the Gebby folks about this idea of just the concept of a Jackson.
Oh, there should be.
And of course, they funded the statue, and John Hamilton was very active in maintaining that Jackson legacy, and so they were very willing to consider a lot of things. I don't know where this will go, but at least the conversations have started.
Certainly it'd be worthwhile.
Yeah.
Because if we have memorials to Lucy, which is nice, very nice, but here is a world-famous individual. Gosh, and he came right from here.
That's right. Now, tell me about, probably I need a genealogical study first. Your relationship with Emmett Ross is what?
Well, of course, he was my uncle. He was my mother's brother.
Okay.
He was born in Rochester. My mother was born in Hamilton, Ontario. Then the family moved to Rochester, and from Rochester down to Jamestown. My mother's folks, her father was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and her mother in Essex, England.
I'll be there.
Then they eventually got down here, and after my mother and father died, my father died when I was only 5 years old. My mother died when I was 11 years old. And then Emmett Ross, her brother, and Anna Britton Ross, his wife, they decided to take my sister and brother and myself into their home, which was a godsend, and they brought us up from that point, which was quite a burden for them, a terrific burden, and I only wish they lived longer so that we could show our appreciation, which I'm sure in our younger ages, why we probably didn't as much as we should.
Right.
But that was the relationship, and my father was an attorney, a very successful attorney actually, and he was corporation counsel and then of course mayor.
That's James?
And then my uncle went into practice with him.
And your father's name was?
James L. Weeks, yes.
Seen that name.
He was in the firm of Booty, Fowler, and Weeks way back. I guess they were in the Fenton building at that time. And then I remember they were in the Chattacoin building, which is the old Bigelow building now. That was the Chattacoin. I remember I was in his office. It was facing east. And I remember when the steeple of the old Presbyterian church came down. I remember that, seeing that come down from the view from the office. And of course that's where the Hotel Jamestown building is now. And my uncle was one of the first tenants in the Hotel Jamestown building after it was constructed. You know, Franco Anderson, F.O. Anderson, you probably remember him or hearing of him. And then Jackson, Herrick, Durkin, and Leet were in the building too. So we saw quite a bit of Jackson at that time. And of course you know Ernie Leet and Gerald Herrick. Durkin you may not have known. He was an Irish gentleman, very nice. We knew him very well because he didn't live too far from us in Jamestown. That was quite a notable firm.
That's right.
And I guess it broke up when Jackson was appointed as Commissioner of Internal Revenue in Washington. And that's, as I had mentioned to you before, on a couple of occasions, I was in George Washington University at that time for pre-law. I went over to see Jackson. He had a big, spacious office. Oh my golly. That was really beyond the need that he had, but it was beautifully arranged, and he was very cordial. Gentleman like he always had been.
Were they just sort of social visits, or were they there
No,
for any other reason?
just a social visit.
Yeah.
Yes, because I didn't have anything of a legal nature at that time. It was just the fact that I had known him here. Why, I thought it'd be nice to drop in to see him, and he was very pleased. At least he appeared to be very pleased that I did, and I'm sure he was.
He was a very political guy, wasn't he?
Political?
Political, very politically party related as far as Democratic party.
Oh yes, he was a firm Democrat. I guess that came from his family. And every time Roosevelt would come to this area, why, he'd entertain the governor, and he never ran for office. Bob never ran for office, but was well entrenched in the Democrat Party. I mean, it was his forte, and certainly it was a good relationship because Roosevelt recognized his capabilities and his incisiveness, and he knew he'd be a good man to bring to Washington, which turned out to be very true.
What did Mr. Jackson indicate to you at that age what kind of his goals were? I mean, did he have where his prize was? He's in Washington now. Did he have aspirations? I'm sure he did, but did he express them?
Not. I don't have any recollection of in that way. No. He earlier, when I was in high school, Jackson, of course, had, I think it was a postgraduate course at Jamestown High, and he got his diploma. And when he was there, and I don't know whether the Lyceum was still going when you were in high school, was it? Well, the Lyceum was a debating society for young men. I guess it could have been for girls too, but that's the way things were back then. It was either men or women, and the Lyceum was the debating society for the young fellows. And I, by happenstance, happened to be president of it for 1 year, and Jackson would visit us occasionally and talk to us about the demeanor of young men who were interested in debating, and as I recall, he was very much for incisive thinking, which was one of the things that stuck with me, and the clarity of speech. He tried to impress upon us that necessity. So we were always glad whenever he'd visit us at the high school, and that was just when he was just in practice here. And I don't know whether it was even before he was with Herrick, Durkin, and Leet. I think it might have been before their partnership even. But he was always interested in young people, and I guess that's maybe why I felt he'd be amenable to my calling on him in Washington.
I think that's neat. You just kind of called up, made a how do you? At the time, did you have to write in advance? Did you call?
No, I like a darn little fool would just go over there and make myself known, and his receptionist was very cordial, and went in, and he said, "We'll have him come in." Yeah. So that was the way it was. No, there wasn't any formal introduction that way.
While in Jamestown, and while your paths crossed with his, what was his reputation insofar as the type of practice he did? Was he a corporate lawyer? Was he known as a litigator?
Well, of course, you probably know his background in that. Of course, he was well known as a corporate lawyer, golly. Very successful in that. And even in his little trials, he had a way of winning. I remember he had this case in which I believe my uncle, Emmett Ross, was representing the plaintiff in a little accident that was out between Sinclairville and Gary. This farmer on his little rig came out into the highway and was hit by an automobile that was coming by, and it killed the horse and ruined the buggy, and I don't recall what injuries the farmer had. But anyway, my uncle was representing the farmer, and Bob Jackson was representing the owner of the automobile that struck it. The outcome, I don't remember what it was, but I remember I listened in on the case a little myself. And of course, Jackson was very much at ease, as he always was, in presenting his case. So it was that, I mean, he'd have a general practice. Now, if you'd take a little case like that, why, it would have to be general practice.
Exactly.
But of course, he eventually was a real corporate lawyer, and was the one that his firm would turn over those heavy cases to him, which is understandable. I mean, golly, a person with that ability, he'd get the hard cases.
Yeah.
Of course, the other ones, like Ernie Leet was a terrific attorney. Gerald Hare was good, but I don't recall exactly what his specialty was, and Durkin, I don't know what his specialty was either. I don't know how many years, maybe it might have been less than 10 years that firm existed until Bob went on to Washington.
While he was in Washington, did he still have a place here in Jamestown? Did he still live here?
I don't know. You probably know where he lived.
Where he lived, yeah.
With the pillars on Fairmount Extension. Well, that was his home, and he grew his family there. Mary and Bill, they were a little younger than I was, so I was not familiar with them too much. I knew them, but as I mentioned before, Frank Taylor was courting Mary Jackson, and it looked as though they were going to be married. I mean, it was that type of a relationship. Oh, and another thing, as you probably know too, Bob was interested in horses, and he had stables out near Lakewood. I know. Do you know where the Perkins restaurant is?
Yes.
Now it's Denny's, I guess. It was in that area, and that's probably part of the property that he had at that time. But he was very interested in horses. As a matter of fact, he was, when he went, I don't know if you're familiar with the Mark Master degree in the York Rite Masonry. Well, the Mark Master, you have to have a Masonic mark, you know, like the Masons way back. They would put their mark on stones that were in the buildings as they constructed, and that is their little masterpiece. And they could always be identified. If the stone was perfect, they'd be praised. If it were not, why, they'd have their mark on it. But when he went into that phase of masonry, why, his mark was a horse head. And we've got the Book of Marks in the lodge, and you turn it over, and here's Bob Jackson and his own inscription, and the horse head was his mark.
Okay.
But he was very interested in horses and riding. I don't think racing. I don't think he was involved in horse racing. But that was one of his hobbies, was the horsemanship.
Now, would your paths cross when he would move his way up the chairs, if you will, in Washington towards the... Well, let me back up. When he was named as Associate Justice, what was the reaction among the bar members here?
Well, I imagine they were jubilant. At that time, I suppose I was still in college or in law school, so I guess I'm not familiar enough as to the reaction, but I'm sure they were all jubilant, with the exception of possibly the one you probably read there was Sid Hughes.
Yeah.
His remarks. I don't know, there must have been some disappointment between the two of them. I don't know what it could have been, because I don't see how anybody would disapprove of almost anything that Jackson had done. But anyway,
That and Walter Edson had some things where he respected Jackson, but he disagreed in a lot of the stuff.
oh, that's Edson for you. I mean, he wanted to probably put that in of self-importance of himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anybody could have said that,
Mm-hmm.
but he would put it in writing.
Yeah.
Did you ever know?
No, I knew Sam, of
That's-
course, but yeah.
He was sort of a prudish individual, nice enough, but very straight-laced and opinionated.
Mm.
So that, I'm sure that is the reason he didn't put it in writing.
Yeah. Now, when Jackson goes off to Nuremberg, was that something that the folks here in Jamestown, did you guys follow the trial at all because of Jackson's involvement? Is there any independent recollection of that?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, you probably, I don't know who you'd get here that would be still living at that time. 'Cause all these people have passed on. And, of course, that was shortly after the war, and we were all trying to establish ourselves. I got into politics, gosh, I don't know, Sid Hughes and Russ Rogerson pushed me into that.
Tell me about that. Stan Weeks comes back at the end of the war. How'd they grab you by the lapel and say, "You're our guy"?
Well, I don't know. They got me into the political arena, and I, early on, in the 1940s something, was made the president of the Republican Club of Greater Jamestown. I still have some of the stationery at the office. And I was president of that for 9 years, of all things. And we were in the city elections, in the county, in the state, and gosh, we were active as all get out. And then Sid Hughes was on the school board in Jamestown, and at the end of his term, why, he told me that I have got to get in there and run for that office to fill his vacancy, which I did, and fortunately was elected. So I was on the school board until I forget what election, 1948 or something like that, 1946. Anyway, whatever. I ran for position of county supervisor and was elected to that, so I had to resign from the school board, which I'd been on, I think, for 4 years. And so represented, among others, including Mike Lombardo. He was a county supervisor, and several of the others. We'd go up to Mayville, I think, once a week to work on the board of supervisors. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And
Well, tell me, how'd you end up being mayor of the city of Jamestown?
Well, Sid Hughes and Russ Rogerson, of course, they had quite a bit of influence with Oscar Lene and Pat Schobeck, and a lot of the manufacturers in town. And they sort of christened me to be the candidate And I did run for the mayor's position. The first time I lost, I think it was by 141 votes or some such thing as that. And then the next 2 years, why, they pushed again, and so I ran the second time and came out very well, because although it was a nonpartisan system of election in those days, it was the Greater Jamestown Party that I was in, and that second time I ran, I got the endorsement of the Republicans and the Democrats both, because I don't know why. I don't know as I was that impressive, but anyway, they felt it was a nice thing that I should run, and I did get their endorsements, and we came out with very good results, and we had an excellent council.
What year was this? Years for this?
Well, I was mayor for 1952 and 1953, and it was all-consuming in time-wise. It was a terrific job, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every minute of it, but it was almost 16 to 17 hours a day. It wasn't just office time. After office, then you had evening meetings and places that you had to be representing the city, and all the organizations would want you to speak at their dinners and luncheons, and so we didn't have the facilities they've got now. There were no electric typewriters even, no dictating machines, so, and no ombudsmen, and no assistants to the mayor. So it was all on your own shoulders, all those things. And it was so all-consuming. I figured if I ran another time, I'd probably have to give up my law completely, because I couldn't come back to much. There wouldn't be much carryover at that time, so I didn't run for a second term, which I think was a wise thing. I always thought maybe when I retired I could go back into it, but now when you retire, oh, that's the last thing you want to do. It isn't as enticing as it would have been back then. So that was the sum total of my activities that way.
Tell me about when Jackson died and they had the funeral here. You were not the mayor then, but you were back in practice.
Mm-hmm.
You involved at all in the funeral yourself?
No. All of the attorneys, naturally, attended the services at St. Luke's, and all the justices of the Supreme Court and many other dignitaries, the governor, I think it was Governor Dewey at that time, and dignitaries from all over were here. And then they had a luncheon at Moonbrook Country Club for members of the Supreme Court and some others. But it's hard to remember just the details of what was arranged. I know it was very, very well arranged, whatever it was. but I was not part and parcel of that in any way. I was just one of the concerned persons.
Did you get a chance to interface at all with the justices?
No, I didn't. No. Their luncheon at Moonbrook was rather an exclusive arrangement. I don't recall who was invited to have luncheon with them, because there were so many dignitaries that they wouldn't reach down into the lower echelons. But it was a sad thing that he should leave so early. But I guess he had rumblings of difficulties, physical difficulties, which people back then were not cognizant about, which was a shame. But
Jackson was active in the Masonic Temple.
yes, yes.
Did he come back to any meetings when he was in town? Did he attend? Do you recall?
I don't recall. I don't recall. I would doubt that he would have much occasion on returning to Jamestown to actually attend any meetings. It's quite difficult for him to arrange to do that, because he may not be back at the time the meetings are being held. They're only once every 2 weeks. But he was active. He went through the Blue Lodge, and you probably have seen over in the Scottish Rite Temple, I had it framed, his petition for the degrees, and it's amazing the beautiful handwriting he had, and I can see the handwriting that you see there, your autograph, is just perfect handwriting. Well, that's the way it was way back when he petitioned for Masonry. And then he took his York Rite degrees, the chapter and the Mark Master, and right up through to the Knights Templar, and he had all his regalia. His sword is up there on display, and you probably saw that. And then he went into the Scottish Rite, and we have a picture. There was a little later, one of the classes in the Scottish Rite classes was named in his honor, and he came from Washington, and he attended all the ceremonies. And we have this big picture. Oh, I don't know how many men took their degrees at that time, but it shows him in the front row. Have you seen that?
That I have not seen that.
Well, it's up in at the Scottish Rite. You can see it if you're interested. Might be interested in your work to have a copy of it made.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a matter of fact, gee, if I weren't leaving this weekend, why, I'd get it and take it over to Quick Copy and have a copy of it made for you, if I can do that when I return. But it would be good for your files.
Absolutely. He was a justice at the time? Did he have the class named after him?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure he was a justice at that time. But he's sitting in the front row, just as prim and proper as he had his 33rd degree cap on.
Wonderful.
Looked fit as a fiddle. But he always enjoyed and respected his Masonry, which is a great attribute. But I wish I could give you more information, Greg.
You've given me a lot.
Well, I'm not so sure. But
You interfaced with him on a first-hand knowledge that, I hate to say it, but he died in 1954. There aren't a lot of folks around who can say that.
mm-hmm.
You know, no, in whatever form or fashion, can do that. And as you pointed out in the picture here, Tracy and Bob and you are the three from that composite.
Yeah, the only three that are left there, which is a shame. Oh, gosh. There's an awful lot of wisdom in that group that could have filled in an awful lot.
Oh, well, there's an awful lot there. Bainbridge Colby, did your paths ever cross with his?
Oh, met him. Do you remember the house that he had at up the lake? It would be just on the north side of the highway, on the lake, on the Bemis Point side, just above. You know where Warner's is?
Yep.
Warner's? Well, it would be just about there, but on the north side of the highway, this beautiful home. Now, it was a beautiful home, well constructed, and the attic was completely covered with I'm getting too old to remember things, words. Moth, no, they were moth-proof. Now what? Cedar.
Cedar, yeah.
Cedar.
Absolutely.
Everything was all cedar. All the doors and the walls and everything, cedar. And it was a nice, large place. And after Mr. Colby died, he had left that to the state of New York, I think it was, and there was a stone in the front lawn commemorating the fact that he had given it in his name and all that, and the dates and so forth. And you know how the state of New York handles things. You remember the Wetmore place on Long Point?
Yep.
You know what they did with that? They just let it sit there. And here, this beautiful home, and I know Sarita and I had been invited up there at one time to his home, and his wife was there. She was very nice, and she was, I think, Swedish, a Swedish extraction anyway. And very gracious. But then, getting back to that, now after he died, and then after she died, the house went to the state of New York. And there it sat. And people would break into it, leave the doors open. The winter, the snow, and everything came in. Then people would come in and take some of the woodwork. They'd take the radiators. They'd take the the beautiful fireplace mantles. Yeah. And it just deteriorated until it had to be torn down.
Oh, God.
Isn't that wicked? And that's the same way they've done with the Wetmore place at Long Point. That's at a point where I don't know whether they're going to save that or not. There's some rumblings that they're going to try to, but it would be very difficult. It was a beautiful place. You probably remember that.
I do.
But that's what happened to Bainbridge Colby's home. And, to think that something like that could happen is beyond belief. Yeah. Just, a sad, sad commentary on life. And here, they give it with all good intent that it can be used for something nice. They could even have their offices administering the Long Island State Park.
Sure.
But no, it just went.
That's a shame. I know the only thing I remember is going to Russ Rogerson's office, and Russ had Bainbridge Colby's desk.
Oh.
And he would tell people that's the Secretary of State's desk, you know. And frankly, Bainbridge Colby, the name meant very little to me, but as Secretary of State of the United States, that did. And only later in life have I really kind of fit all this together. I assume Russ was a friend of Bainbridge's and somehow probably handled the estate, who knows.
Do you remember Ted Barkstrom?
Yes.
Well, of course, when the house was deteriorating and then they had to get rid of a lot of the papers and everything, Ted found this check made out by Bainbridge Colby to Kane Lodge number such and such in New York City. It was in payment of his Masonic dues. And Ted gave it to me, and I had it framed, so the lodge now has that,
Isn't that neat?
just as a memento, signed by Bainbridge Colby, Kane Lodge number so-and-so for his dues, which is an interesting sidelight. But we have that. Now, since we moved out to that new location, why, they've got it stored someplace, but they'll be putting it up sometime again.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
I noticed on this, some of the other players. I mean, it was impressive to me when I looked at this. Whether you had the Bainbridge Colbys and you had the Robert Jacksons, and you know, a lot of brains, a lot of brain power. You mentioned. Any other personalities that jump out at that and that composite that say this is a guy that's kind of an extraordinary story?
Well, of course, Lee Ottaway, who was Justice of the New York Supreme Court. I knew him very well, and his son, Bob Ottaway, we went to school together. But then there's Harley Crosby, who was presiding Justice of the Appellate Division of the Supreme Court in the Fourth Department. He lived down in Falconer, a very modest little house down there. And when I went to law school at Cornell, his daughter was in the same class that I was.
I'll be there.
And of course there's Judge Bodine, Judge Barger.
We come across Alan Barger when I was doing the research on the history of professional baseball. He was apparently a big baseball guy.
Oh, yeah. I see you got your baseball sign.
Yeah. Apparently very much responsible for the stadium that was down there. He and Ernie Kessler were the two.
Oh, Kessler, yeah. He inveigled me in, and I didn't have much money, but he inveigled me into buying stock in that. I think I still have it.
There you go. Now that's a piece worthwhile.
Do you want some of that
I
stock?
would love that. I've never seen it.
Well, if I can find it, I must have it there someplace, because every once in a while I bewail the fact that, guys, no return on that.
Yeah, but
It was
it's
just
right.
a donation. Oh, well, Ernie Cockcroft. Oh, he was quite a figure. He was corporation counsel for Sam Carlson, and I think it was through his efforts that they had the nonpartisan system of government for Jamestown, which it should still be. It'd be much better than this partisan. But and I don't know if you heard that story. Sam Carlson course, was very influential among the Swedish population of Jamestown. And they always looked up to him and took his advice. And he was one of the officers of the Birmingham Sales. That's that automobile they built here.
Yeah.
I think it was Birmingham was the name of it, Birmingham Sales. And he inveigled a lot of the Swedish people, the real salt of the earth, to purchase stock in the Birmingham Sales. And a lot of them bought it and just relied on, oh, it's going to be good because Sam Carlson says it's good. And the whole thing blew up. And, oh boy, there was a lot of bitterness. And he was to run again, Sam, for the election to the position of mayor. And they wondered, well, how are we going to overcome this? And Cawcroft and, well, maybe Sam Alessi Sr., I don't know, but of course they were all in this together. They had the round table over at the 210 Pine, that was the group, and they decided, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about those Swedish people? They're just going to vote them out. So the day before the election, they had these pamphlets printed up, and they left on all the doorsteps of the Swedish population. Throw out the Swedes, vote for, I don't know who the fellow was running against Sam, vote for someone, throw out the Swedes. Oh boy, they just swarmed in back. They're not going to let that happen. But that was
Ernie.
That was quite a ploy.
Yeah.
But Ernie Crawcroft was the mastermind, and he was a good attorney.
Yeah.
I don't remember if you remember, he was a very good friend of Daisy Dow. Remember Daisy Dow? Where Ron Height has
Yes. Okay, yeah.
That's the Dow house.
Yep.
Well, that's where she lived, and she was a very nice lady, and very friendly and outgoing, and had a lot of friends. But that was Ernie's. He never was married. That was his girlfriend.
Yeah.
J. Samuel Fowler. I think he was the son of that Booty Fowler and Weeks. That was when my father started practicing. He was in Booty, Fowler, and Weeks, and that Booty would be Bob's grandfather.
Oh my gosh.
And that would be, the Fowler would be the father of J. Samuel Fowler. That's old Lawrence Carlson. You probably remember Lawrence.
Yeah, he was.
And he was Mrs. White's father. Let's see. White, the dentist.
Herb White.
Herb's wife was. He would be the son-in-law of D. Lawrence. Marion Fisher. He was very well respected, and I have his safe, his office safe.
No kidding.
Yeah, and but he was very meticulous. If his secretary, of course, back in those days, no electric typewriters or anything. Back in those days, if the secretary made a mistake, and it looked as though it was a mistake, he'd make her do the whole thing over again. Boy, he was very, very pointed in his work, and very successful. He did very well. And old Adolph Johnson, you remember Adolph?
I do.
That'd be Mary Taylor's father. He was one time was an assemblyman.
That I didn't know.
Yeah, and Jude and Johnson. George Washington Jude. Here he is. Here, George Washington Jude. He lived to be 99 years old, and the year before he died, and he lived right across, almost across from where we live now. But there was that big vacant lot. There's an apartment house there now. But he come out with a scythe. He'd scythe that whole lot. Every year he'd scythe it, except the last year before he died, which he died at 99.
Wow.
Old Travie look. Here's Wilson Price. He doesn't have the patch over his eye.
Yeah, that's funny. I noticed that. And as I see the pictures along here, I always had the patch, at least in the bank, when they show him as the president of the bank here.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the picture I've ever seen him was the patch. What happened there? What happened to his eye?
I don't know what happened. I think he must have taken the patch off because it looks as though one eye is a squint. So for picture purposes, he kept the thing off.
Yeah.
I think it would have been nice if he'd had it on because it's very distinctive. Oh, Clarence Pickard. You know, he was quite a nice-looking guy when he was younger, and hadn't taken on all that weight. And if he'd taken care of himself, I think he would have been okay. I had a picture, and gee, I wondered, where the heck am I going to do with this? It was a picture of 1926, a bar outing, the North and South County bar outing at Frank Mott's cottage on the lake at Driftwood, is it? I think Driftwood. And it shows all the attorneys, including Bob Jackson, and but there was a good one of Clive Wright and my uncle, and all of them. I don't know. Do you remember seeing that picture? I took it to the Post-Journal, and they put it in the Post-Journal once. But I had the thing framed, and I thought, gee, I can't leave it in my office because, you know, I'm sort of passé and sort of closed. So I took it out to Wright in Hampton because there was a good picture of Clive in there.
Yeah.
And so I gave it to them. So if you get out to their office sometime, I ask to see it. And you'll see the whole group, and it shows Bob Jackson all dressed up with a bow tie, and other ones that you'd recognize, and I've got the names of those who are in it. There were 3 or 4 that I didn't connect. I think they were from the North Bar, and I didn't know what their names were. But Herrick is in there, and of course Leet. Poor old Allison Olson. Gosh, that's a shame. He had cancer and died too young. But he was a good attorney. And Clayt Jones. Did you remember Clayt Jones Sr.?
No, just Junior.
Yeah, we call him Casey Jones. Al Erickson died young. Marvin Clapp. Well, yeah, there's brings back a lot of memories here.
Gotta ask, how did you and Sarita meet?
The what?
How did you and Sarita meet?
Oh, we were about that tall.
Is that right?
Of course, she was born in Mexico City, and her folks had come from Fredonia, and her father was an engineer, and he went, the family, she wasn't born yet, but her mother and father went down to Mexico City, and he was engineer for the Mexican government in some harbor project, I guess it was. And so they settled in Mexico City, and they were there for several years, and then Sarita was born. And during the summers, usually Sarita and the mother, sometimes the father, but not all the time, they'd take the train all the way up to Dunkirk, and then they'd get off to visit Sarita's grandmother and grandfather and the other relatives in that area. And and she was just youngster, and my aunt Anna, who was married to Emmett Ross, also had come from Fredonia, and her relatives and Sarita's relatives in the area were interrelated, and they'd come back and forth, and very often on Sundays we'd go up there and visit, and that was how it was. We came up, and we were both about this tall, and I met Sarita at that time, and she was just a youngster, so that's how we met. And then she didn't come to this country until after they had left Mexico to Switzerland, and she was in Switzerland for 7 or 8 years and went to school there. And the first time that she really lived in this country was when she came to Wellesley to go to college. And it was during that time I invited her one Christmas time to the bachelor's ball, the Alpha Zeta bachelor's ball. You probably remember those things. And she was at Wellesley at that time, and we'd communicate back and forth occasionally. And then when I was sent back from the South Pacific, I came back on the hospital ship because I had contracted some sort of jungle rot of some sort. Not very serious, but they figured, well, they've got to clear that up. So I was at Yosemite for 1 month, sort of rehabilitation. Have you been to Yosemite?
No, I haven't.
Well, there's this big Ahwahnee Hotel. It's the biggest hotel in the area, and that was just, oh gosh, and I didn't feel bad. I felt wonderfully. So we had horseback riding and exercises, hikings, and enjoying the glories of Yosemite. And then they sent me to St. Albans in Jamaica, New York, in the metropolitan area, where they thought, well, they'll get this thing cleared up yet. But the time I left, that was the time it cleared up. So the whole time down in New York at the hospital down there in St. Albans, it was of no use. But getting in and out of the service is a big tangle. So I was on duty down there in New York for a while, and in the meantime I'd go up to Troy, New York, at Russell Sage, where Sarita was teaching at that time. And we just decided, well, why don't we get married? So that's a long story, isn't it? You asked for something
I
there.
want it, yeah. Hey, now, Sarita, she's always had, I mean, this unbelievable interest in travel and other cultures is extraordinary. And she's always had this intrigue?
Yes. Well, having been born in Mexico and then living in Switzerland, and her mother would take her to Italy, Germany, France, Spain, all over there. And it really got to her, I guess. She just can't get it out of her. Like, I thought we should go to Florida again this winter because we're no spring chickens. She's 86 and I'm 88.
You guys hide that so well. You've been so active. It's great.
Well, I don't know. But we shouldn't be gallivanting around. But it looks, if everything goes right, we're going to go to Spain. Just because she wants to get out of the country. Of course, she likes to speak Spanish because that's her native language. And, of course, she used to teach it, too. And, well, anyway, it looks as though that's where we're going to be. But, yes, she can't get it out of her mind to travel. And, of course, as a result, I've traveled a heck of a lot much more than I should have. But it hasn't been something that I looked forward to. I've enjoyed it, yes, yeah. But I suppose she wants to die with her boots on.
Does she do diaries? I mean, all the travel she's done, all the experiences she's had, does she sit down and write her experiences out?
She can just sit down and start writing. Yeah. Of course, her handwriting is very bad now, so she has to do it by typewriter.
Yeah. She does it?
She does it, yes. It just comes to her. She enjoys writing about her activities that way. But she's even got some things she wants to write now. But I don't know. It's so difficult because she can't use her longhand anymore. It's just illegible, and mine is almost illegible now.
You ought to get our dictation equipment so you can just talk it through.
We've got some of that, yes, but then the transposing it and all that. Of course, now this dictating equipment that you just talk into it and it comes out. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the answer.
Yeah.
It's probably too late though for what she'd like to do. She'd like to write a book on all of her activities, but I don't know who'd read it other than herself.
Yeah. She gave a bunch of dresses, as I recall. Was it University of Buffalo? She donated a substantial collection.
Oh, well, that's the Buffalo Museum of Science.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, she's given so much stuff. Costumes. Every place she'd go, she'd buy costumes, and very expensive, detailed, and she knows almost every stitch in every one of them, and they're up there. But there they sit. Very few they ever display, mm-hmm. Which is very disconcerting to her. Mm-hmm. And whether they're taking care of them properly, with the proper humidity and all that requires for these fabrics, it's just extremely distressing for her.
She's still on the board up there, does she?
Yeah, she was. I don't know how many years, quite a few years, maybe 8 or 9 years on the Board of Trustees. she's no longer on the board, but has very good contacts with them. We go up there occasionally. She's given a lot of the furniture and Oriental rugs that they had in Mexico